You're live, Judge.
What a great opening picture, actually. Anyway, I want to welcome our guest today. Her name is Athena, and she's going to be giving us a lot of information that we don't normally get from the press. I've said often, as a matter of fact, that you shouldn't necessarily rely on what you read in the media because it doesn't really tell the story. It gives you the spin on what they think is the story. And so, what I try to do in this show is bring people on who present different views on subject matters and allow the audience to make a determination or a decision as to what they want to believe or not. So, welcome and thank you for appearing on the show today. It's going to be very interesting. So,
Thank you
tell
so
us a
much for
little bit
having me.
about your biographic material, where you work, what you do, and things like that.
Yeah, so I am a lifelong entrepreneur. I started a marketing company when I was 19, and I ran a chamber of commerce in Washington, D.C. for several years. And then I was kind of recruited by social media platforms into becoming an influencer because I did so well managing other content creators. And I've kind of moved into content creation and the adult industry since then.
Well, what we're going to talk about is a very, very hot subject. It was
Hmm.
a hot subject during the election. It's a hot subject now, and it's extraordinarily controversial. I mean, there people are on one side or the other. There's very
Yeah.
little room in the middle, and what you basically hear is a one-sided on a more negative note. And I want you to talk about the positive things that go along with your life. So that's why I invited you as a guest today. So, what the public doesn't know uh, about people transitioning is legend. So, anyway,
Mhm.
tell us what it was like for you before you transitioned.
I never really lived life as anything other than what I am now, except for in my very early years. I came out as trans when I was 13, and at that point, I had already been wearing makeup and had long hair, whether my parents liked it or not. It's just what felt the most natural and most authentic for me. And I just kind of went up to my mom one day in my freshman year of high school and said, "These are my pronouns, she and her, and this is what I want my name to be." And from that point forward, this is how I've lived. So um, yeah, it was a much easier experience for me than I know what other people have been through trying to come out.
Yeah, well, how has it affected you that you transitioned and people are aware of that? Has it affected your business life, your social life, anything like that?
Well, sure. Yeah. I mean, I definitely tend to stick more socially around people who are affirming, or I don't even necessarily want them to be affirming. I just don't want to be treated, you know, in a negative way compared to how they would treat somebody else. But for the most part, I think people are good and I'm treated very well in public. I don't, have a ton of problems moving through my day-to-day life. Um, in terms of business, it's actually been an incredible advantage for me. The LGBT community at large have gone from being one of the most marginalized communities in America to some of the highest earning demographics in the country. And we did that by pulling together and supporting each other. So leaned into that with my marketing business, and it really worked for me.
Well, I've got to tell a great story because I was thinking about it the other day, and to talk about the effect that people respond to when they find out about somebody who's transitions. So this is an absolutely true story. It happened when I was practicing law full time, and I had a client who came in originally as a male, and he had worked in the county and was in an automobile accident. Just a
Mhm.
simple rear ender, not much in the way of damages, normally what we call soft tissue injuries. They range between $5,000 and $8,000, generally speaking. And so when my client came in, her name was now Tanya. And so when I called State Farm, the insurance company, and tried to settle the case, normally they offer you peanuts, which is what they're doing
Mhm.
now with regard to these fires and things. And so when I got the adjuster on the phone, I said, there's a very unusual story here. And he says, what's the story? I said, well, before the accident, it was a man who was working for the county, and a married man. And because of this impact and this accident, it caused him to trigger some inner desire, and he transitioned into becoming a woman, and has changed her life dramatically. And the guy said, that's kind of an interesting story. I said, well, it's true. I mean, here it was, he was A, and now he's B, and this is what happened to him. I settled the case for $50,000.
Mm.
Somehow, whatever I said to the adjuster must have triggered something. Well, obviously triggered something, but
Wow.
the reason I tell the story is because it has a different effect on people. When you
Mhm.
meet someone who's transitioned, uh, a lot of times you get an initial impression, and sometimes the impression is not a favorable one. Sometimes it is favorable, but it certainly does generate interest. And that's what's going on right now. And do you think you've experienced any prejudice because of your transition?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think, and actually, I was just talking about this last night. There was a cosmetics company. I'm not going to say who it was, but I had admired this business for a really, really long time, and I had sold their products at another retailer. This was like 15 years ago. Um, and I went to interview to work with them directly at a counter. And I aced the interview, and I was pulled back by the manager, and I was expecting good news or to be hired on the spot. And what she said was, you did great, and you're great at what you do, but unfortunately we can't hire you because you would alienate our customer base. And I just thought to myself, how horrible, that they have to, as a business, one, they have to give up talent that they would have hired otherwise, um, because of other people's viewpoint or discrimination or negative impression that they would have possibly hypothetically had of me. Um, and there's been people even in high school, educators, um, people on the street. Um, I've absolutely experienced it, but it's not the main narrative that I like to engage with in my own mind. For the most part, I think, like I said earlier, people are good, and I'm treated not really any differently than anybody else.
Well, that was really the purpose of my question, was to talk about prejudice.
Mhm.
People respond to other people in a variety of different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to do with sexual orientation or anything else. It's knee-jerk reaction that we get a lot of
Mhm.
times from meeting someone that is kind of different than what you expect. Have you
Yeah.
found that in your life as well?
Yes. Um, I recently got back in touch with one side of my family that I hadn't been in touch with for since I was a child, essentially. And I think when they were seeing me, they were expecting to see the little boy grown up that they saw, and they did see that, but they saw Athena. Um, and it was an incredibly awkward interaction. Um, I was not made to feel welcome or, they communicated very differently with me in person than they had been over messages, in the months leading up to that visit. Um, there has definitely been, I'm much more physically transitioned now. I don't really consider myself still to be in transition. Like, I think that for the most part, that's journey is complete for me. But before I could afford to have surgeries done and injectables and the things that I've done, walking down the street. at times would give me so much anxiety that I wouldn't leave the house because of other people's the faces they would make, or they'd see me and immediately whisper to their friend and point, and then they turn around and look, and yeah, it's not like a super great way to live
Well,
when you're dealing with that.
do you think you have to earn the respect of your family members who originally thought A and now they're seeing something very different than A? Do you think you had to overcome certain things to be accepted as a person?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot, I feel like 15 years ago, people barely knew what trans was. And now it's, you can't go onto any website or turn on the news without hearing about trans people. So I think the narrative is kind of being written by people who are not living that experience, this experience. So I do feel like I constantly kind of when I'm meeting new people who aren't already acquainted with a trans person, which is like 80% of America doesn't personally know a trans person. I'm kind of dealing with that media narrative over like them getting to know me as an individual.
Well, what do you think? And I know it's not just an opinion, and it's probably a little speculative to say the least.
Mm.
What do you think should be done to create a more level, equal playing field where people are judged on who they are, not what they are?
Well, I don't think that's exclusive to trans people. I think we have an issue with that across the board in this country right now. I think we need to practice some virtues and some grace across the board. I think that really applies to no matter where you fall on the political spectrum. I think there's a nastiness in our culture right now, and it's mainly online. I don't see it so much in person. Like I'm treated much worse online than I am in person. People are keyboard warriors. They get very bold under the cloak of anonymity, or at least perceived anonymity, because when you're online, it's not really totally private. I think we need to, one, remember that we're all in this together and we're all human, and bringing back a sense of a duty to be respectful to your peers and to your American brothers and sisters is I think would solve a lot of the problems that we have right now.
Have you been threatened?
In what way?
Well, when
Physically
people
or
when people find out that you're trans, do you think that they've been prejudiced against you to such a degree that they feel threatened?
yeah, some people. I think those are pretty extreme. That's not common, but there are people who feel some sort of personal insult by my transness.
Well, it's kind of interesting. Over the history, there are always political issues, whether whether it's taxes or domestic policy or foreign policy, whatever. Political issues. This issue, when I say issue, I'm talking about trans people in
Mhm.
general. Uh, this is probably one of the hottest political issues that I've seen, and I've been around for a fair amount of years. Uh, that's going on right now. The division here is so dramatic. As I said earlier, uh, you're on one side or the other. It seems,
Mm,
and there's not a lot of people in the middle who believes everybody should have the right to be whatever they want to be, which is the way it should be. Everybody should be whoever they want to be without being judged by other people. But this is
mhm,
political now. In fact, if I watch all the various channels or whatever they call them these days, cable stations, and I watch both sides. I'm neither a Democrat or a Republican. I'm an independent. So I've always looked at things as an issue by issue situation. But
same.
when you look at what's on the cable stations and whatever, the ones that are on the far left are anti-trans by the vote, even. I think 50 Democrats voted against some legislation that would have been positive for trans people. And
Mhm.
on the Republican side, even though a lot of it is generated by religious persuasions and moral, as they see it, moral issues, they are on the opposite side. So, how do you think, if at all, I'm going to sneeze?
Bless you.
Thank you. How do you think this is going to get resolved politically? Because they say that the trans issue caused a lot of people to vote differently than they would have voted otherwise.
Sure. I mean, I think depoliticizing it is um, the solution. I don't think I remember in 2008, I grew up in California, and marriage equality was on the state ballot, Proposition 8, and that was the first time I realized that queer people were treated differently by the world, and I thought it was so ridiculous that other people could vote on somebody else's right uh, to marry, which seemed like such a fundamental and personal decision that the government and the public should have absolutely no say so in. Um, so I think returning to the values written in our Constitution, that we're all created equal and we have certain unalienable rights, and one of those being the pursuit of happiness. And it, I don't think trans people in and of ourselves are what have led to these extremes. I think when I watch the news, I see one narrative on one side and the opposite on the other, and it's kind of like almost like they're trying to convince us on how to think, and I don't think that's their role. I don't think that's what they should be doing, and I think that's what's influenced people's conviction on the trans issue. I just think it's gotten to a point where, you have extremists on both sides. There are absolutely trans gender ideology extremists that I absolutely don't agree with 99% of what they say. I don't think that you have to ignore, like, I'm a biological male. I understand that. I'm not, um, I'm not ever going to deny that. And I don't feel the need to. I actually think that denying my transness and saying that I'm just a woman and not saying a trans woman is actually equally as transphobic as calling me a man, because I'm not a man either. Um, so I think, again, coming back to our individual rights, um, and protecting those no matter whether we agree with them or not is the solution to a lot of our cultural and social issues right now. Because it's really not my business how somebody else lives, and it's not their business how I live.
Well, it certainly is a hot button right now.
Mhm,
Among the major issues, and of course, we're seeing multiple changes being made because of the changes in the administration and attitudes. But you can almost tell if you watch the more far left people, like shows that appear on cable stations like CNN, that are
mhm,
they appear to be very, very much opposed to your lifestyle or the decisions that you've made. And on the other hand, if you watch other cable stations, they're far more tolerant and more understanding. Although you wouldn't think that. Your first instinct, I suppose, from a political science standpoint, is different. But
mm,
if you just watch, in fact, I use this as an example all the time. You have assume undisputed facts on some issue. Undisputed. If you watch one station, they give you the spin and you see it from one place. Same exact facts, different station, they see it as entirely different. Same facts. And
mhm,
so what we're seeing now, I suppose, there's a lot of attention being drawn to this. I'm calling it an issue because I can't think of another word for it at the moment. But don't you think it's a lot of wasted time judging other people as opposed to dealing with your own life and what things mean to you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think identity politics is ridiculous. And I don't think it's the media's place to be offering as much opinion as they do. I think that's absolutely an individual right to publish your own opinion, but I think we need to return to, I believe it was called the Fairness Doctrine that was done away with in the 70s that essentially mandated that news outlets couldn't necessarily take a side politically and that their job was to report the facts and not necessarily interpret them to the extent that they do now. Because I think that's part of what has gotten so out of hand.
Do you think it made any difference in the election? Because
Oh,
I know
yeah.
that they quoted Kamala Harris as saying that uh, people should have transsexual operations even if they're in prison and they're illegal immigrants. That didn't fly too well with most people that I talk to.
That didn't fly
And
well with me.
well, the bottom line is, do you think it ultimately caused people to vote differently than they might have voted and pick this as an issue as opposed to the economy or the immigration or other issues?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think there's also a lot of influence from fake news or maybe singling out a highly isolated, extreme incident and blowing it so out of proportion that people become scared of something that really doesn't, a threat that is non existent. I think that honestly is a huge piece of it. I see this one ad on Twitter all the time, and it's this gentleman saying that he voted for Trump in the last cycle because he was convinced that Democrats were more concerned with a man showering with his little granddaughter than about the issues that Americans actually face in their day-to-day lives. And I thought, how ridiculous is that? But that's his reality. And if you go into the social media algorithms and how we're fed all of this information, um, a lot of us live in our own completely unique echo chamber that is constantly reinforced subliminally and in all kinds of tricky ways online. And I think when we're getting our information that way, it's incredibly dangerous, and there's no way that we can make an informed decision as a people on who to put into office and represent us.
I want to kind of touch on just two specific subjects because they are the subjects that are being discussed most often. And one, of course, is uh, biological men who are transitioned, uh, uh, competing in what is called women's sports.
Mhm,
That's made a lot of difference, I think, just as an outsider in the
mhm,
election as well. A lot of people were very offended by that fact that women were basically being treated unfairly because there was a perceived advantage for trans people. And
mm.
that, I think, made a big difference. What do you think?
I think it made a big would you like me to talk about how it impacted the election or about
Sure,
trans people in sports?
both.
Okay, so there are absolutely instances that a transgender female, should not be competing with biological women in sports. Like, that's just a fact. Again, you do not have to deny scientific realities to be supportive and accepting of trans people. I think that that's a narrative that's been pushed by the extremists, and it's ridiculous to me. There are people, trans women, who have started hormones at a reasonable age, 12, 13, 14, that never underwent male puberty, who never developed these advantages or perceived advantages that are talked about a lot of the time. So I think blanket bans on trans people in sports is stupid because you're then, taking away a right to physical activity and fitness, which I think is super important for every person, from a large group of people, millions of people. But then if you look at situations like Leah Thomas, the swimmer, I think she had been on hormones, and I could be wrong, but I think she had been on hormones for like 6 months before she switched and started competing in the female category. I don't think that's appropriate at all. She had already been through puberty. I mean, you could look at her in the photo and see that her body was composed differently than the women that she was competing with. So uh, I think a lot more research needs to be done on it, because it's kind of amazing that we keep talking about it, but there really hasn't been a whole lot of science studied or done about it. So I think trans people are just kind of being scapegoated all over the place, and we are the scary woke boogeyman for people. But if you actually have a conversation with a trans person, 90% of us are incredibly reasonable.
Okay, now you mentioned it kind of briefly, and I had it on my notes to ask you, and that is the question of the locker room.
Mm.
How would you feel going into a man's locker room?
In a man's locker room? Oh no, I wouldn't. I never would. Actually,
Okay,
in school, in middle school, the last time I was in a school locker room, um, I asked to just use the gender neutral bathroom to change in and out of my uh, PE uniform. And that's what I did because it was more comfortable for me, because I was harassed and bullied so, you know, badly in the locker room. I just didn't want to go in there.
and how about you're going into the women's locker room?
I
Since you
think
mentioned,
yeah, I think presentation, obviously this is different for different age groups. I'm grown now and I don't present as a man. I don't get a ton of looks when I go into a women's bathroom or locker room. I use them at the gym. People are comfortable. They know that I'm not a threat to them. I think the average female knows that I'm absolutely not a threat to her, even if she can tell that I'm trans or not. So, yeah, I think it comes down to presentation. I don't think that anybody should be made to feel uncomfortable by a trans woman who decided yesterday she was trans, put on a dress, and still has a beard and looks very masculine. Obviously, that would just be, I mean, that would be startling to me to see, because it's not something that we see in our day-to-day lives all that much. But if I guess if you're not causing a disturbance, then I don't cause a disturbance, so I go into the female locker rooms at the gym and the sports clubs, and, I don't really have any problems.
I want to talk about one other issue that, again, I'm using
Mhm.
the word in its broadest sense, age. A
Mm,
lot of the complaints, I'm calling them complaints, or negative comments, are that people are basically transforming at a too early age, like 5 and 6 and 7 years old, where somebody says, "Mommy, I want to be," and mommy and daddy say, "Okay," and they start the process, which of course is irreversible. And
mhm.
that is a discussion that might make for good concessions on parts of both sides. Not that that's
Mhm.
ever going to happen because these guys can't agree on anything.
No.
But the fact of the matter is, what do you think about that? Do you think there should be some kind of age limit? Like you can't drive it until you get to be a certain age. You can't drink until you get to a certain age. You shouldn't be able to trans until you reach either puberty or post puberty.
Sure. So, I mean, I 100% the trans people that I know who were able to start hormones before they went through, puberty, um, have better lives. They move more freely and more stealth, as we call it, through society. They are not the trans people that you think of when you think trans person, right? They blend in, they are normal contributing members of society. Um, Children, as far as I know, and I've done quite a bit of research on all of this, children are not medically transitioning at 5 or 6 years old. There's really nothing to do medically at that point. You kind of have to wait until 12, 13, when puberty sets in. And then there are hormone or testosterone blockers for trans women. Um, I was on those, and it was one of the greatest burdens lifted off my shoulders. So I will always support that. I think if you're under the age of 13, um, you I think it's fine to socially transition. Like, kids aren't going to their parents and telling them that they're trans willy-nilly and with no forethought. Um, it's something that is so deep-seated, and it has to be discovered within oneself first before it can be shared with externally. So if there is a child at that age that's coming to a parent and saying, "I'm not this, I'm that," I think that should be respected. That doesn't mean you go booking surgeries, but you allow that child to wear the clothing and go by the name and pronouns that they prefer. And if they find themselves much more comfortable that way, 99% of trans people don't ever detransition. Like, they're gonna stay like that because that's what is most authentic to them. And kids know themselves. Like, they may not know a lot about the world, but they do know themselves. And I think we should trust them when when they tell us who they are.
So you don't have any age limitation?
Well, for medical transitioning, or
Well, just general transitioning as that term is understood.
I mean, sure, if whatever age a kid is when they, can form a complex thought, and express something about themselves that wasn't just told to them. Um, I think that should be the age limit. I don't think there are parents or many parents who are transitioning their kids, kind of um, unbeknownst to the child themselves. I don't think that that happens. That's something I've been seeing a lot as well. That's like, oh, they made their kid trans. And I'm like, you can't make your kid trans. You can't make your kid straight. You can't make your kid gay. Like, your kid is just going to be what your kid is. Um, so
So let me close with just asking you if there are any organizations or groups that people could consult if they're interested in the subject, obviously, to get
sure.
more accurate information and to educate themselves on what really is this is about.
Yeah. So there's, I would say in um, entertainment and media, GLAAD, GLAAD is an amazing resource. Economically, the NGLCC, National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, also has a ton of information. Um, Medically, there are a number of organizations, I couldn't even list them all off. Like, the information is available, widely available and publicly available. So, I urge people before they form an opinion based on the ridiculousness of the media to look at the facts themselves and make a determination.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Athena. I've learned a lot about a subject that I probably would not have even inquired about, but for the fact that it is such a major issue in our political world today. And you're a very bright lady. Thank you very much for being on the show today.
Thanks so much, Judge.